Well, we're going to return to the political sphere for a little bit, and there's been some stories that kind of dominated the past week, and they relate to various efforts around the country to remove the name of Donald Trump from ballots in this year, 2024, for the presidential election,
Mhm.
on under the auspices, allegedly, of the 14th Amendment. So, what I want to do is take a couple minutes and explain what's going on, what their argument is, how absurd it is, and then give a little sort of thought about why I think they're doing this. Um, and ultimately, as my title of the story says, it's another example of the just utter hypocrisy of liberalism. Liberalism and communists are just, because they're always in this sort of doublespeak world, are always self-contradictory and hypocritical, right? So they're saving democracy by not letting you vote for someone that, latest poll, 75-80% of Republicans want to vote for in the nominating process. Well, wait, you might vote for that person, so we have to save democracy by not letting you participate in democracy, right? It's classic. But what are they doing? They are essentially attempting to use a provision of the 14th Amendment. Now, the 14th Amendment is one of the amendments adopted post Civil War by the kind of radical Republicans that took over after Lincoln's assassination. And they passed, in addition to some Reconstruction Acts, three amendments to the Constitution. The 14th has a lot of things going on in it, and one of which is Section 3. Probably never heard of it because it really was something adopted just for their time. It says no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president or vice president or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under the other state, or having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or an officer of the United States or as a member of any state legislature or executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may, by two-thirds vote, remove this. Now, what's this all about? Well, this was, again, highly specific. What they had was the Civil War is over, South is defeated, but then they each of the states that had gone into rebellion had to satisfy certain requirements to be allowed back into Congress. So as states started to satisfy those requirements, their representatives would show up, and lo and behold, they were people who were in the government of the Confederacy during the Civil War. In fact, the vice president of the Confederacy shows up. So this kind of irked the Republicans who were in control of Congress. Like, wait, why are these people we were fighting against now here? And they passed this amendment to try to bar them from office. And the it did work. It kept a lot of those people out for a while, but eventually the nation needed to heal. And Congress, which has this ability to say, "I'll forget about it," passed several series of laws saying, okay, everybody is allowed to be reelected or be elected into office. There's amnesty for anyone. And in fact, posthumously, but they even removed this bar from office from Robert E. Lee. So the general that commanded not a mob, not a riot, but an actual army, they said, oh, it doesn't even apply to him. So this is just to give you a sense of how this section was used. But I also want to turn you to Section 5, because this is really important. Section 5 applies to the whole 14th Amendment. So Section 3 plus all the others, it says, the Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. Because that's really important. As it says, individuals and other organs of state or federal government have no power to enforce this amendment, including Section 3, only the Congress does. So it's up to the Congress to figure out who's allowed, not allowed in office. Now, ironically, Nancy Pelosi made this very argument herself when she tried to bring the second impeachment hoax in January 2020. She said, well, the Congress has to bar Trump from office, so that's why we're impeaching him, because that's how we'll bar him from office. Epically failed. So now they've kind of forgotten that. And what have they been doing? Well, about this year, they've been filing lawsuits and taking action in a whole variety of states. And some of them have just been quickly dispensed with. In conservative states like Florida and Arkansas, but even in blue states like California. California one was actually the funniest that I read. It was actually a guy filed his lawsuit to have Trump removed from the ballot because he suffered emotional distress by watching what went on January 6th outside and inside the Capitol. And he was so emotionally distressed that Trump had to be taken off the ballot to solve his emotional distress.
So ridiculous.
So it was actually so ridiculous that a Clinton appointed liberal judge in California just threw it out. Like it summarily said, "You're gone. Get out of here." That was my favorite one. Like emotional. I get emotionally distressed every time I see Biden's face. So, but in any event, the news really broke that 2 states seem to actually not do this crackpot thing, but actually do it. So Colorado removed Trump from and again, right now we're talking about the primary ballot, not the general election, because the primaries happen first, the first half of the year. So Republicans wouldn't be able to vote in the primary for Trump. Removed it. The Trump campaign, the GOP filed a lawsuit. It went to the California Supreme Court, dominated by radical liberals, and they upheld it. Said, oh, yeah, Trump engaged in an insurrection against the United States. Now, whatever your thoughts on January 6th, it is very clear from when they adopted the 14th Amendment, they are not talking about a public disturbance, even if you want to call it a riot. They're not saying if you riot. They say you engage in essentially what the South did, the southern states, a secession from the United States and an attempt, to wage war against the United States with an army, right? That's what they're talking about. That's what the amendment was adopted for. So again, whatever you think happened on January 6th, nobody seceded from the United States, nor did Trump actually even participate in it, for that matter. But in any event, the Colorado Supreme Court bizarrely says, yeah, fine. That immediately got stayed, that action, because the GOP filed an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court for review. And then Colorado said, oh, well, since it's on appeal, we'll let him on the ballot anyway. Maine, the state of Maine, removed Trump from the ballot by action of the Secretary of State. Immediately, again, reversed course, put him back on because that also got appealed. Now, what do I think is going on? First of all, I think, well, these people are stupid, but they're not that stupid. And they actually, even if they are stupid, they do have some lawyers who are, I think, saying, like, this is going nowhere, because this whole interpretation is, first of all, absurd. Well, again, whatever happened on January 6, 2020 was not an insurrection, right? They're liberals for years have gone into committee rooms, into Congress, and protested and shouted. Supreme Court had happened. Nobody brought actions to bar them from things because everybody knew it was a protest. It was a riot, even if it got out of hand. But it was not an insurrection. So just on the facts, they're gone. Secondly, the amendment itself specifically authorizes congressional action, not secretaries of state and not courts, to enforce it. And so only Congress, by an act of Congress, could say this person's off the ballot. Last of which, again, I think that last point is the strongest point, but another very strong point, it's not clear that Section 3 meant to cover the office of president. Why? Words matter in laws. And it says you're barred from Senate, House of Representatives, elector of president or vice president, but it doesn't actually say president or vice president, right? Is interesting. And why do I think that is? And it also goes on to list anybody who took an oath of office, and lists everything, including state governors, but doesn't mention the president of the United States, mentions the executive or judicial of a state, not the executive officer of the government. Why? Again, because I think what were they thinking about? There was no president of the United States who had engaged in rebellion. They were all former congressmen, representatives, senators, or state officials. And they were the ones they were trying to keep out because this was Civil War specific. So they didn't name no former president of the United States because there were none who had engaged in the rebellion. So there was no need to mention it. Again, to me, very clear evidence. This was a provision which is no longer of any force because it was to deal with people who are all now long dead. The Civil War. So if this is such a stupid argument that they're going to lose, why are they doing it? For the same reason I think they brought all these cases against Donald Trump. They really think, I think they haven't figured out that the old lockdown of information of the lamestream media has lost its grip. Because in the past, all you had to do was float a bunch of bad stories about people. Ooh, they're removed from the ballot, and everything would fall apart. Everybody would turn on NBC, MSNBC, whatever, CNN. Oh, there's all these law. Oh, that must be a gap. I'm not gonna. We can't vote for him. That they just that's how things worked for decades in this country. People just sort of blindly filed it. Well, what we learned, I think, one of the things Trump's campaign in 2016 taught us is people get their information other ways. And just having these sort of stunts to have stories come out doesn't affect people. That's why, I don't know, what are we up to, like over 150 charges that have been brought against Trump and indictments, hundreds of them, and he gets more popular every time. If that had happened in the 1990s, right, people who were just vaguely accused of maybe having done something or gone from the race the next day, that era is just over in American politics. So I think it's a miscalculation on their part. Again, I think they knew these things wouldn't happen. He would never get taken off the ballot, but they just wanted the stunt to plant the story in the news, and I think it's just ultimately not going to do anything. Again, the fact it's now Trump is not removed from any ballot. um, I think they knew that was going to happen, and they knew they would just get really smacked by the Supreme Court if they actually pulled his name off the ballot. So that I think their hope is it'll get to the Supreme Court and they'll just say, well, it's moot. He's on the ballot now. We don't even need to decide it. It's my prediction. I think the Supreme Court will avoid it as long as they possibly can. And that certainly will. The only time they'd intervene is that they tried to remove him from the general election ballot later in the year. But I think the irony of ironies, this story really, the best part of the story is it just shows how stupid these people are, but also just how utterly hypocritical are they don't care one bit about elections, electoral politics, the voice of the people, the people's will, at all whatsoever. Liberals, all they care about is using elections to get rubber stamps on their agenda when it's to their advantage. And when it's not, they want to do things outside the electoral system. It's just like the example John Venari used to talk about all the time. The EU proposed a constitution. They put it to a vote in member countries. It was voted down in 2 countries. So it couldn't pass. So what did they do? They rewrote the Constitution as a bunch of directives that could be passed by the European Council without a vote of the people, but it had the exact same provisions. So they did exactly what they wanted and just avoided a vote. Again, that they don't care about saving democracy. They care
Mm.
about pursuing their agenda.
Yeah, and I think you can also you see this with the church liberals as well, and you especially see it
Yes.
within the United States. You see they only care about historical documents and legal documents when it benefits their agenda, and you see this with you'll get people quoting the Council of Trent on, well, you need to obey directives from the papacy when it comes to the liturgy, but then they don't want to read the parts of the Council of Trent where it says, well, no, you can't actually have the mass in the vernacular, for example, or directives that are instituting the traditional Latin mass. It's such a strange situation. I in my latest interview that I had with Charles Colomb, I think he brought up a good point, which is that the tyranny that we have today is much worse than any monarch during the 17th or 18th century really could have imagined. This sort of just
Yeah.
absolute power, no legal basis for anything, just sort of forcing things through. It's very clear that they will stop at nothing really to obtain power, and they want to make sure that no change can occur whatsoever. And I'm very glad we were actually able to read the document, as people often say we should with the fiducia supplicans. We can read this document, the United States legal documents, and say, well, no, actually this has no basis at all. So thanks for that analysis. I appreciate it.
No, it's I think this is going to be an interesting year. This 2024 election cycle is going to be really interesting. And one comment I saw in the comments of our live viewers, you're absolutely right. This is not a Democrat versus Republican issue at all. I mean, there are Republicans who are behind some of these lawsuits. Some of them have actually being and attempts to remove them from the ballot. And so
Mhm.
that simple Democrat Republican dichotomy, which was never really there. I mean,
Mhm.
the but it's even more blatant now that there's not like good bad between Democrat and Republican. There's a lot of people in the Republican Party who are really operatives of the Marxist revolutionaries, and so you're absolutely right. I forget who it was that made that comment. This is a broader fight than these two donkey elephant symbols.
Yeah, absolutely.